Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Jerry Zaremski, and I'm the Washington Bureau Chief for the Buffalo News and the President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome our club members and their guests who are joining us today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-SPAN. We're looking forward to today's speech, and afterwards, I'll ask as many questions as time permits. Please hold your applause during the speech so that we have time for questions. For our broadcast audience, I'd like to explain that if you hear applause, it may be from the guests and members of the general public who attend our luncheons and not necessarily from the working press. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Chris Berry, President and General Manager of News Talk 630 WMAL. Laura Robertson, International Producer for CBN News. April Ryan, White House Correspondent and Washington Bureau Chief for American Urban Radio Network. Pete Williams, NBC News Justice Correspondent and a guest of Mrs. Cheney. Catherine Skiba, Washington Correspondent for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Clarence Page, syndicated columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Liz Cheney, daughter of Lynn Cheney. Skipping over the podium, Melissa Charbonneau, the Vice Chair of the NPC Speakers Committee and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's lunch and White House correspondent for CBN News. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Rick Dunham, former National Press Club President and the Washington Bureau Chief for the Houston Chronicle. Betsy Fisher, Executive Producer for NBC's Meet the Press. Kelly Wright, Fox News correspondent and host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Jeff Gannon, online columnist, a voice of the new media, and author of The Great Media War. Marguerite Sullivan, Director of the Center for International Media Assistance and a former president of the Washington Press Club. And Dick Cheney, Vice President of the United States of America. Our guest today is a noted historian, a best-selling author, and the spouse of someone who we thought would be spending this lunch hour in an undisclosed location. Lynn Cheney, whom I suppose we could now call the Vice First Lady, was a homecoming queen and state baton twirling champion back in Wyoming while in high school. And she never predicted back then that her high school sweetheart, a nice boy with a crew cut named Richard, would someday become Vice President of the United States. In fact, when the football captain and class president first asked her out, she asked him, "Are you kidding?" Those days in Wyoming were idyllic days for the young girl who would become Mrs. Cheney, and she writes about them in her new memoir, Blue Skies, No Fences. The Washington Post called the book an homage to her childhood, her husband's childhood, and the American West. Mrs. Cheney joins us today to discuss her new book, but chances are that she's got plenty of other things to say as well. She honed her skills as a political commentator by serving as co-host of CNN's Sunday edition of Crossfire. And while on a book tour this month, Cheney joked with Comedy Central's Jon Stewart that she arrived on the set bearing a gift, an action figure of Darth Vader, the Star Wars villain that Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton once compared to the vice president. A staunch defender of her husband and the Bush administration, Lynn Cheney has been an outspoken supporter of the war on terror. Her message, freedom is fragile and must be defended. It's a lesson known that Mrs. Cheney, known to some as the conservative culture warrior, says should be taught to America's children. Mrs. Cheney was a Reagan appointee to head the National Endowment for the Humanities. And today, as the nation's second lady, Lynn Cheney continues to champion the importance of education and history. She founded the James Madison Book Awards to promote excellence in American history. She is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and she has written 5 best-selling books about America's history for children and families. Today, though, Mrs. Cheney joins us to talk about some history that is a bit more personal in nature, the history that's recounted in her new book. Mrs. Cheney, welcome to the National Press Club.